What's good, everybody? It's King here. Hope you guys are having a great day. Welcome to another form of tier list. But unlike some power skins, it's going to be video games again. So, with this tier list might change depending on how I feel. But I feel really confident in it. I took a lot of time to think over it, coming it together, really full process my thoughts. And simply put, as you see by obviously, the thumbnail, title, and record of the fact of, how I do these tier lists. Simply put, I'm going to be ranking the Far Cry games from weakest to best, aka from lowest to greatest. So, with this being said, all these games are obviously here and or DLCs or events. I'm going to explain some more, but I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope you guys have been enjoying the tier list so far. If you're new, like, subscribe, comment, whatever you want to do. Share if you would like. Do what you want to do, you know what I'm saying? Tell me what you guys rank your best Far Cry game or best of the Far Cry games. And I'm hoping that you're going to be down to go and listen to what I have to say and, hear out what I have to go ahead and say in this instance. But, yeah, pretty much it. So, you see by the screen and with the fact of, me hyping up hypothetically the stream at different points, this entire tier list is literally based, obviously, on my current thoughts of all the Far Cry games. I have a series, for y'all who don't know, that's me replaying games on your Xbox Series X or PS5. I've done multiple replays on PS5 and now Pro Max of PS5, and I've iconically done multi-run of different games on Xbox Series X. And I talked about this with my Assassin's Creed ranking tier list, about me replaying all those games and DLCs and events, whatever the case may be, on Xbox Series X. And I'll be pushing to possibly do some different other shit on the case of PS5, aka PS5 Pro Max, right? But I plan to do that for the Far Cry games. I have almost every Far Cry game. I'm trying to get them all back because I've played all of these in our events. I'm just trying to set it up in, case of timeline setup, because technically the timeline of Far Cry is very ambiguous. We know really one or two games that have a specific time date, as technically none of these games have a specific time structure. Yeah, but I'm trying to be playing it in somewhat hypothetical chronological order, like I did with Assassin's Creed, and that's obviously a lot more set in stone. So yeah, in this though, I'm obviously going to be ranking games and events. So enough said, let's go ahead and get to it. So for didn't play, you have all of these events in your game or not that come with it. So for instance, I didn't play the Danny Trejo stuff of Far Cry 6. Didn't even know it existed until now. Didn't really care for it, you know what I'm saying? Far Cry Instincts, didn't even know that game existed. Far Cry Vengeance never really intrigued me. I don't really care for the case of, the Far Cry 1 protagonist that much to really peek into that, because I don't even know if it actually is him, because obviously he looks similar to, the poster cover for the original Far Cry. But I just didn't really care for this overarching case of, story that comes with it. And then this one that's pretty much like a parody of Rambo, I just didn't really care for, and the poster just kind of looks weird to me. And so yeah, didn't play these, don't really care for them. What is being said, shouldn't exist. Far Cry New Dawn, I heard some people like the gameplay aspects of it and the world, and there's some elements of it that are cool, but to me the world is very much an undergrading of what made Far Cry 5's world so peak, right? Within its atmospheric, characters, location, and feel. I feel like it's an underform because everything kind of looks the same and there's no sense of distinctness. I do not like the music too much in it because it just seems like a replay of the same shit. I do not like different story elements of it, even with Joseph Seed, or seeing the case of the deputy again, because I do not care for him / he. I do not care for the rookie to becoming deputy, becoming the right-hand person to Joseph Seed, his bodyguard. There's nothing more to that. And Joseph's quote-unquote redemption arc is not too compelling to the point where it really takes anything away from him or anything like that. There's also an argument I feel like someone like Joseph Seed should not have a redemption arc. And to me, I feel like how it was done was kind of just whatever. It's not too compelling or intriguing to me. And I don't like the story. It's just booty. I think it's shit. I think it's without a doubt just the worst. It just should not even be a thing. It don't even count as its own fucking game. This is half-ass DLC. I hate the twins. I do not like the voice acting or any substance matter to come from it, and I just don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like how it's done, and I don't give a fuck about it. I just really don't. It should not exist. It doesn't add anything to anything. If anything, it downgrades shit. Shit shouldn't exist. That simple. What is being said. But moving on for the rest of the tier list on the screen, we have mid here with the Vanishing, aka the case of the Demogorgon event with Far Cry 6 is the only thing that I played because of the fact that at the time I was a little bit more of a bigger Stranger Things fan, at least avid watcher. I don't really care for it too much because obviously nothing with Stranger Things will ever top season 1. And it was just a cool, interesting thing. Not too interesting, but it was fun. It was playable. It was enticing, and I really love the music, and I do like the crossover for what it is. And it's the only one that actually has some inpull of substance matter in it, because, again, two other cases of events, what is being said, or possible DLC addings to it do not really matter that much to me. That even goes with like the Horizon one. I forgot to add that to this, but if I had to say anything about that, that would go with the didn't play or not really care because I don't know these are in canon and it kind of just goes too fantasy, wild mix of shit for me personally to really care about. So again, that would go into the didn't play with the either events to DLCs sense of shit, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, but with the top of mid, what is being said, which is not too much, is Far Cry 4, the Yeti expansion, or Valley of the Yetis. The only reason why it's above is because obviously it has a lot more considerable, tight-knit, interesting going story. You could put them either way for me. But because it has Yetis, the Himalayas is very interesting as a place. There's a lot more to its domain. The argument that the story, even though not having that much substance filled and kind of being whatever, I really think it's just there to explore the Himalayas and kill Yetis. I do think at least the story tries giving some mysterious ongoing shit, even though in the end, like, you have this nigga AJ turn into a fucking Yeti. I just don't understand that. I don't really care for it, to say the least. And I mean, yeah, like, that's all I really have to say about it. It's just like, it's cool. Nothing bad about it. It could be pushed to cool, but I'm going to explain why cool is the way it is, aka the C tier in this case. But yeah, cool is for games that are bare minimum, cool, solid case of games, or in this sense, you have a DLC that grow the franchise and gameplay or some interesting case of story elements or beats or really feel like their own solid visual things. These are little snacks that don't really add too much different or down from anything different. They just, exist or in the middle as mid is, you know what I'm saying? But Far Cry Blood Dragons is an interesting case of game from the last time I played it. Has interesting ongoing shit. I, figured out that, there isn't a fucking dragon as the villain, even if, a dragon is a major technical antagonistic threat. I think the world, music, and feel and arguable protagonist is like somewhat interesting, not too much, but I think it's like a fine case of installment. It's unique, not as unique as one of the greater unique Far Cry games like Far Cry Primal, but I think it's good. Far Cry 1, the first game of the series, I think it's very cool, very solid, interesting, goes into a bunch of different interesting shit. And I think the protagonist and what the story is, even though not being the greatest substance-filled bussin', I think it does have a nice sense of, icing on the cake and a lot of interesting shit. I like how it's a lot more, down to earth, even if it is a game where you fight the most wild shenanigans amount of motherfuckers. It is the most James Bond video game I think I've ever played from my personal experience. And, like, it's a very interesting credited game, to say the least. But it just doesn't do so much more salvage or busting that makes a difference. And I arguably think like some aspects of the game is a little bit just kind of cringe, at least just to me. And greater stuff in the villain obviously is not that interesting. He's just stereotypical plain evil. But it's still a very defined game in its own credit. Now we have Far Cry 2. That's a little bit above. From the fact that the world is interesting, being in, South Africa is very interesting within the plane that we're in. The mercenary's dilemma, because coming from I think the mercenary has like syphilis and needs to take like medicine and shit because of that. It's the most wild thing ever. Or like gonorrhea, I don't know what disease he has, because coming from wrong, like the case of the disease to mix like illness is associated with a sexually transmitted disease. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the fact that the Jackal is literally Far Cry 1 protagonist as an antagonist, it's interesting because you won't see that much in video games. I think Far Cry 2 and a couple are the only few games to actually do something like that. And the reason for why the Jackal, aka the Far Cry 1's protagonist, is put in the scenario that he is in is a very interesting case of thing, right? And it adds a lot more interesting dilemma and psychological trip for the purpose for why a person would go into a deep, crazy, wild war that the case of the mercenary that you are in would do, and other things along those lines. Now, Far Cry 4 is here because obviously the world, pagan men, music, the journey, and in fact, it does have interesting substance matter in different parts of the game, but it is not as interesting to me to the greatest extent like other games or DLC in this case are, because simply put, the story is one of the biggest pullbacks to me. I feel like a lot of the antagonists, besides obviously pagan men, are not that interestingly delved into. Duplur, most underwhelming. All right, Noir doesn't even feel like a villain, right? Because let me make this clear with this tier list shit, right? This is just a game. I'm gonna do a Far Cry antagonist tier list, and I'm gonna do a protagonist tier list. With this being said, right, and it's gonna be for how I feel about them now, and I will obviously change something or make a freaking community post if I change my opinion on it. With that being said, like I've done with others, but let me tell you this right now: Noir does not feel like a villain at all, and any possible aspects of what she's done bad, you do not see truly done out. And even which way you heard, I feel more bad for her because she was forced into that shit, and that's obvious, right? Pagan Men carries it because every aspect of his being is not a full-fledged villain, and I would argue he's not even full stamp a villain. I think AJ is such a mediocre, unsubstance-filled protagonist, and he has all the potential to be something of more interesting intrigue. He arguably has so much wild throttle of plot relevance to plot armor for what he does. And same time, he just doesn't have any gravitas or any sense of uniqueness like Jason Brody, with the count for how he goes about all these clusterfuck wild shenanigans, and there's something dissolved or up for his character personality-wise or psychology. This nigga AJ does dang near the same, but arguably way more wild frenzy of killing that Jason does. Feels nothing from it. So good at killing, has no military experience. Sabal in the meat this whole freaking gray, lesser of two evils, ambiguous dilemma, and case of plot threads is such a very niche and very weird, trippy topic to discuss. I like it in concept, but I just feel like the argument for what it is not a very solid representation of how to actually do a plot line that is split between two different hairs of arguable want for good, but doing it in the most tremendous fucked way. Both of them are dislikable people. Amita is more deliberately because she's a user. She's a victim just to be a victim. She has no strong reasons to, and if she actually has went through something, she's using that as a fucking false pretense rationalization, false equivalence to what she's doing. She's just a terrible person and is a blatantly spiteful person in every case of the way. Sabal has more righteousness on his side, regardless if he knew her father, because Mohan's not a good person entirely either, and Mohan treated Sabal how Sabal would treat AJ. They're both disgraceful individuals. He's preach about tradition might seem noble, but it's really just power broken and trying to stamp his foot down on traditions that hold true reasonable substance matter / reasonableness to fight for, but it's trying to elongate the pavement of, power holster and not true separations and bonds. And that might sound naive on some Connor Kenway shit, but I feel like every fallacy with his points with Amita falls in just the lines of a person trying to overhype their means to be better without understanding the conflicting factors that can downforce their means. Because both of them are right in some way. It's just how they're going to do it is terrible. And, the child marriage thing, the fucked up case of matter perception with things, what he does, and his technical ending for, his path is bad, but they're both just terrible people. AJ's true path should just be going to Lakshmana, his late little sister, putting his ashes of his mother with her ashes, not killing pagan men. I mean, I just feel like the entire story has no true substance or matter to really go with. And again, this split between two sides of the same coin is just the most uncongruent credit of defined matter of writing piece that it can be, because it's just mixed bag whatever the place, and it's not a true representation of two interesting dynamics of goals. And even if one is true or not, you can simply take out both of them. There's also even the fact that, let's say, like Yuma, who's another antagonist, she had a lot of possible spice to her, but all she does is get freaky with AJ and doesn't do anything more. Shawty has no true credibility to being really in the game to make anything super interesting when she has every possible right to be, right? But she doesn't make that happen. And I just think the voice actress, her case of character possible capabilities was so downplayed and downgraded to muck. And there's nothing greater in a grand cause of, like, substance matter for, to be made or something like that, in the sense of like making the story actually be fleshed out, because there isn't really anything going on in the story to really, I feel like, care about besides just moving through things to get your mother buried, which is kind of interstellar, purpose and point to be reminded of, because in the way that Pagan Min used his daughter's death to basically fuel his madness, it's the same way AJ is allowing his mother's need to be, rested at Lakshmana as a fuel to desecrate his opposition. But that's not poked at. The whole idea of insanity, the same way beautifully Far Cry 3 does it, was not represented in the same sense. So again, it's like it's just a dismemberment of all the possible greater lines to be made. And I do like Far Cry 4. I'm trashing on the story, obviously, but I think the overarching game and parts of the story do have interest. Like, I do think it's cool to see about the lore, see Mohan's words. Pagan Min, I said, carries the game beautifully, and all the creative aspects about him are so beautiful. But again, it's just so uninterestingly coming together. They just downgrade to the most biggest crooked line thing, like dilemma push for the case of, the story, to where it just seems like absent of any true, like, credit of actual, like, story stellarness, you know what I'm saying? But besides the Yap session, with the final thing in cool, we have Far Cry 6 Collapse, the origin story and bigger evolvement of this man, Joseph Seed. That gives you more substance feeling to his character and adds more bigger weight and finding, busting to the case of his, like, character and a little story sense. But it does open a lot of different, questions and deeper matter of his faith and why he saw the way he did, in Far Cry 5. Gives more opening book pour of busting and intrigue into his character and values that you may not believe, regardless of it tying to Christianity, conflictive belief in morale, and idealism and patriotism on the back of finding truth through whatever possible means necessary. And if that means slaying your own child, which is still a fucked idea, and doing the most grade A levels of putridness to find this possible favorment through the truth, is something interesting, because it's all backed by the crooked ideal of religion. And seeing this man's collapse from possibly a solemn man to a demonic, crazed, mentally ill individual for all these trifectas of trauma, and seeing the toll that not just that took on his family members, and how he did what he did in Far Cry 5, I think is so interesting. But the only main problem I have with it is because it's a more shorter length. I feel like it does not touch the same way that obviously the two other DLCs do. Is the fact that Joseph Seed, everything about this thing is kind of already given to us. You just see it in a more like full hue, like, of the emotion feel to it, because you see how it came. You just hear about everything that happens in Collapse from, like, people reading and shit like that, you don't actually unravel it. You know what I'm saying? You don't see it through clear eyes. You see it through his eyes, and it only does so much to give a grace of actual understanding, when in truth, it's just pretty much half-case explanation for his madness fuel. And again, I have a problem with that, because obviously you can only try to explain so much undoubtedly spout of evil, but I think it does like a good half-sense telling of like what type of man can become the way he is through these flawed, ideals of his, and at the same time how much down course it can bring a nigga when he feels somewhat truthful about what he's saying when you think about it, especially if you play Far Cry 5. But it is the biggest downside to not just himself but others, because he's willing to bring about a whole river pour of blood to spell out the problem. And that's terrible. He is using the flames of ruin as a justification to scourge through humanity or people on a very delirious, this devil timing. I mean, my man Joseph is a grotesque human being. It's simple. Like, he's evil, so let's not, get it twisted. But yeah, Far Cry 6's other case of, DLCs in the banger tier is Far Cry 6 Control. Simply put, giving us a bigger picture and representation of pagan men. Pagan men's voice actor being so profound and busting in this field with the music, the culture, the fact that it takes place in Shangri-La, where Shangri-La does put Far Cry 4 pretty good, and Collapse's story main stand is what pushes it, up. But if Far Cry 4, had more parts of Shangri-La and the story was more busting, if we considered, Far Cry 4 Valley, the Yetis all in one, Far Cry 4 could be at a top of cool, maybe even be in banger, but I just feel like the story has so much backtracking parts that it's not good to me. And again, it's not terrible, it's just the story is the main problem I have. But Far Cry 6 Control with pagan men represents the unfortunate take of a man that has had everything granted to him, had the perfect life, had everything so sourly substance to him, you know what I'm saying? And when he was breaking tides from possible bad and collectively making things better, not just for himself, but for Ishmari, his daughter, and had plans to possibly have AJ as a little boy, basically be his son and make a very, flavorful world for them, basically making his destiny become their destiny, making the most greatest possible profound things, and making Karat, a already beautiful land, right, be more flourishing, was all dispersed from him because of the jealousy and hatred of one man. Even though he obviously took Mshwari as a wife from Mohan, Mohan did the things to set the fire for his marriage to be cinderfied and destroy all essence of possibly goodness to be recognized by his people. As a Golden Path were a full running terrorist organization more than anything else, as everything that they preached that he was on one with was not fully corresponding to play until the death of Lakshmana. And you get to see how disturbingly distorted and downright horrific this man's mindset is for all this shit, because he feels like he needs to bend the world of Karat to its knees to find some sense of like purpose, some better feel to something greater, because without basically breaking down a place and confining it to the worldview of your own, you can never have the perfect world. And he had the perfect world in the palm of his hand, but then it was stripped from him because of the fucking actions of one man. He let the actions of one man define his entire worldview of everything. The Golden Path now basically ruled his whole state of means of basically being control, destroy, decimate to eventual confinement to your own means. He basically wanted to run things off of the means of, if I don't control things to the fullest extent, there will never be any possible sense of peace and love in my life, because when chaos broke out and dispersed all building of better grades for myself, I could never actually, see the light. But over time, in Far Cry 4 and within the DLC, you see that stuff was a big chilling invokement of the fact that he has all the capabilities to do greater, but because things never went full solidly in his life with his family idea and Karat's greater plan to pillar off into sky's the limit of profoundness, that should now delimit, to the case of like the biggest downfall of his entire life. Especially because you have to understand that the death of Lakshman literally when she's a 1 year old, because Mohan, the father of AJ, killed a child. His wifey, Shmari, killed him and then took AJ. And any sense of possible peace and flavor in his life that wasn't filled to the brim with the type of mild taste of sadness and depression now became a downgraded of like his will to see things through the peaceful, laid back, chill vibe. He full ran off and became the dictator that we know him to be. You know what I'm saying? The tyrant, arguably. But again, it's so understandable why a man would course down these layers of madness and chaos in a frenzy to try to formulate the best possible idealism coming together world that he wanted to make, because then at that point he could live with the peace that he made something actually work to the best bone, even if he is doing it in a very disastrous way in all accounts. But yeah, I mean, that's it for Far Cry 6 Control. Far Cry 6 Insanity, though, I think it's the best, unironically because it has Vaz, but that mainline is because Vaz is the most interesting antagonist out of everybody else. Insanity taps in to his greater mental, the physiological and psychological trip of Vaz is so interesting and disheartening. The fact that he was bred and groomed into being a literal self-destructive Vato from his mad sister Citra, who is the most evil villain to me in the Far Cry universe. Yes, passing Joseph Seed and Castillo and anyone else you could possibly think of. I mean, this woman has built Vaz up off the back of false traditions, blatant case of mental, physical, and spiritual manipulation, has abused this man mentally, disconfigured his mental state, tortured this man. She has sexually abused this man, forced him into practices that are just foul, making him a killer, full on blasting him into outer space of crash out activity. And the parody representation of him in comparison to Jason Brody and him being made into a beast in human skin, and both of them solidifying the definition of insanity, but in different split hairs, where Vaz is living insanity but can at least unravel the catastrophicness that he pillars in on. But Jason is an unfortunate well of insanity that can never find a stop to overflowing, into where all his water pours out to the point where he's an empty hole and he's literally a hellfire just waving and waving and waving at people with no end. I think that is beautiful. I think that is unfortunately one of the most disgusting and very depressing pour of writing, but it's so steadily crafted and coming together, and shows me some of the few occasions where Ubisoft, regardless of their UB money, instead sometimes can't actually show the most grand form, busting form of money wanting with making a DLC of this much fuego, this decente writing, but also make a very groundbreaking, interesting story. Because a lot of the shit that you already have a half-case knowledge knowing about Vaz is shown in Far Cry 3, but Far Cry 6 went full the mild with it. And, from the case of, the incest talk and, arguable rape of this man Vaz by his own older sister, tick of also, Jason Brody basically being the same as him, but a different count of, just the most wild torching of your soul type activity Vaz being alive and being the plug for Viva la Libertad is very interesting. And again, just everything about Vaz I think is beautiful. And I just love that, the iconic Vaz voice actor came back and rep this man to the most beautiful T like he always will and always do. Now, Far Cry 6 is here. Now, I've always debated that Far Cry 6, even though it does have problems, is one of the most overhated case of Far Cry games. I think it is very still defined, cool, impactful, very beautifully, and graphical design games. I think there's a lot of great characters in this game with the actors. Floodgate, interesting case of shit. I think the music is superb. I think Danny as protagonist, regardless if it's male or female, even though female strikes a little bit more of my interest because Danny's kind of bad though, you know what I'm saying? Of busting character substance and has a lot of grounds of interesting and pulling stuff as a character. I think Castillo is one of the most underappreciated, but at the same time, very much wasted potential Far Cry villain. I think there's a lot of cool aspects to him with his entire record of family and ties and connections and just what in concept he is. A man that has a lot of the right ideas and purpose to stand for something, but wants to full blown solidify the means of control and obedience for the back of him going for the most unfortunate, hectic, disgusting, travesties and tragedies, and he pretty much wants to make what made him strong, what made him become a wolf from the slaughter, basically be the base of Yara. And the fact that Yara has ties to Cuba, different political atmosphere, things that actually are looked into. Like the politics of Far Cry 4 were not that deeply looked into and shown in a better intriguing and defined sense. Far Cry 6 did show that and showed it in a way that actually was calling to some stuff in real life and was calling to the game. I think all aspects of that is interesting. I think Diego wanting his father to be good and wanting, their possible cure to cancer to actually work out in his, case of, purpose to reinvent Yara and reinvent people is the best thing for him and working best in, his favor, because obviously Castillo is sick, but it being a detriment to not just his childhood, his family, with his mother and connections to everybody in Yara, and him having a whole case of biased worldview, deliberately standpointed on the form of being the most top of the top and weak of the weak need to be gone. He has a sentiment of being, if you are not a wolf, you are a sheep and nothing else. He has an insulate case of callous view. He's a very ignorant, blinded man. His whole ideals of shit is reckoned of nothing but a man lustful for power and envious of any possible calling to peace. And I just feel like Far Cry 6 world, feel, different aspects of things like that are good, but the fact that he still doesn't interact with Danny that much, and both of them being similar people, they both have went through unfortunate circumstances that then strive them to go ahead and, move to higher places. If it's Castillo in the political atmosphere and Danny to make it out the mud and basically rack as much money as she can to move to a higher stand and move on with her life and, live slavishly, you know what I'm saying, and or lavish. That shit, could have been interesting, but that wasn't the best represented. But I think the world, the story, the combat, feel, and all around the grand, gory, busting activities that come with it are what makes it be very much a all-round slap experience and gourmet extremes of shit, to say the least. But with the final thing of Far Cry Primal, I think, is the most unique, creative, and innovative Far Cry game. I think it has a lot of slapping things in it that make it be a great porridge of busting and its greater tide, of things. I think it has a great deal of interestingness with it. I think the fact that they went out their way to make it one of not the most immersive things a game ever to be created, with a made-up language, but a language that ties to a bunch of real-life languages and mannerisms and feel, with a story that very much is very heartfelt and very sinks into the biggest pore of your instincts and feel, with great world building, beautiful soundtrack, a lot of cool aspects of gameplay. Through this game, reinvented not just the graphical take, but also slapping into different departments of gameplay dumbness and bussin'. Just like that, Takara as a protagonist is beautiful. And the fact that it's the only Far Cry game to have a technical happy ending, I think is beautiful. And I think it's just stargazer. I think it's so great and delightful in almost every creative way. And yeah, I mean, I just feel like it's a very busting game. I know I like the antagonist, even though I do like Ooh, even though his whole idea is deliberately just insane. I mean, it's blasphemy out this motherfucker. I mean, it's just goofy in the grandstand, but I can understand why he would feel the way he feels. And this take of time, with being 10,000 BCE, right? And then Batari being a fine case matter of antagonistic force and other core sponsorship and all the Winja and the Winja as a concept being interesting. I just love it. I love it from a historical take and I love it from an area take. A saber-tooth tiger as your pet will always be peak fiction. And yeah, simple as that. Now we have Far Cry 5, which I think is the second greatest Far Cry game. Simply put, the gameplay, world, music, the area, even though being, I think, arguably like not the most peak state instance of world to be in for the case of Far Cry, because it is a small town, being a Hope County or Center County, whatever you want to call it, and not being the most groundbreakingly like bussin' sense of something, still has a great defined take of shit. The world works. The Joseph Seed family, I think, is arguably, besides Far Cry 3, dang near the greatest antagonistic force in the entire thing. All of them have something interesting. All of them have something puzzling and intriguing and fascinating. Joseph Seed's whole psychological breakdown and purpose that also strings all his family together in one, from basically making a world built off the back of conflict and destructiveness and anarchy to basically formulate reasons to make order be more heavy and forced and pressurized and not have to live off the backs of faulty, feeble rules, you know what I'm saying? Which make someone like Joseph's older brother, Tick, the movie star, living in his greatest fantasies, a king life and lavishness off of the multi-dummy run of, demolition in people's living and destructive forcemen and, pillars of candy ass jackassness is reasonable in that front. And then his adoptive sister, who wished for something better but can never see that because of the fact of how she was forced into something she didn't want to, and through that made her go full-blown insane, and her spirit can only be free when she's out here breathing in all the acid trip of her land that make people go crazy. She's literally living and breathing in a whole fucking eagle's poison acid trip that courses her, to the paths of deliriousness that make her family, quote unquote family, when I say this, being what they are, you know what I'm saying? So with this being said, that right there makes it so intriguing, enticing. And then the whole end game, first of all, let's talk about the deputy, aka the rookie at first. The deputy is so interesting and defined within their moves, with the fact that even though they don't talk, I feel like they add a lot of substance even with that, because the deputy is a badass, very cool, is a solemn individual, has a lot of mannerisms, aspects, and feel delivered. And I think the fact that hypothetically the deputy could be mute, and the fact that like every aspect of their character and action gives reason to give a fuck for them, and just the pure fact that like with other muted protagonists, like even protagonists who just literally don't speak, there is like a world to build them up and bring like a whole new level of intrigue and substance matter to them. And so with that being said, that right there makes the deputy super interesting. And from being rookie to deputy and all characters tied in the mix of that comes with a great enthrall and loving, dubbing, busting aspect to it that full-fledged throws the character into a new height of, intrigue, especially when you think about how much of like a hypothetical shepherd that really this person was, with taking out all this weakness in the mix of stuff, like how some like Joseph Seed wants to proclaim to take out weakness, to guide people to the better heights of, his belief and talking about God in this. That considerably he works as a unwilling basical pathway to that, because everything that the rookie does leads back to his inevitable plan and his vision that destruction was unironically going to come to Montana, and we don't know to this day who nuked Montana, and that was going to ruin everything, and that would have not been full scene and full shine if he didn't go about the hypothetical taking of him. Now you can say everything that Joseph said and did was the most luckiest, wild, antic, flagrant activity shit, which is definitely true, but the fact that all of it comes together in such a mysterious, symbolically acid fucking way, I think is such a most like wow fave like thing to me, because in this sense the fave of it is like these motherfuckers will string all these different talks of their belief together to this situation, this political or this. His is all based off of the thought process of faith, where he will go full balls deep into the idea that everything he says and everything he does has a purpose. And in some way, everything he did fall to a greater certainty of doom or unravel of it. And willingly or not, we culminated in forcing that into play by literally demolitioning through his entire home just to proclaim it is off the back of safety, secure, and protect. So, with that being said, yes, he's wrong, and we are right to go about what we do, but is a rookie so much better than Joseph Seed because he, scourges through our shit and full goes vigilante on us and tries destroying everything that we have for the greater good of others? Or is he just like us, believing in a system painted by the back of that because we are different, we are this and this and this, that does that make us by default wrong for having our beliefs? And that compares to Joseph, like arguably other protagonists and or antagonists, where you have a guy that believes in everything he does because of the whim of faith. The rookie believes in everything he does because of the whim of justice. But how much justice is truly justice if it costs so many lives to pursue it? So, to me, even though it's not exactly the most tempo-to-tempo comparison, I just simply think that there's an argument to say that that is a cool introspective parody, because they're both doing shit off of the back of justice, but so many things that both of them do, or their sides, or at least the system that they represent of life, do bad, but it's bad for reasons that are not so simple. Because Joseph was technically right, but how he went about it was foul. And the deputy, I think, was entirely right. But there's an argument he's not so much better because he kills everybody off the back of justice as he, as, cop, deputy, whatever you want to call him, is not full out of the gauge of moral hesitance. But he's so hyped on the idea of dumbing things down to kill first, ask questions later. There's an argument, like every other protagonist. Are you so much better than me because of that? And so that's interesting to me. Granted, that's, Joseph Seed's older brother, which is, a defined case of, antagonist himself. But it's something that I wish that, was a little bit more talked about with Far Cry 4, Far Cry 6 in comparison. Because, it's, labeled and stated that, Castillo is just a power smug fucker, you know what I'm saying, who doesn't care about no one else. But still. But Far Cry 3, finally, in this entire yap session, as I'm very passionate with this shit, Far Cry 3 is simply the GOAT from multiple aspects. The best antagonistic group of people, from Vaz, Citra, Hoyt, Buck, all of them. Jason Brody is the best protagonist. Don't even argue it. The music, the Rook Islands, and every aspect of it, every credit, everything that makes it what it is. I love Herc's introduction in it. I obviously love Herc being in almost all these fucking games. And all accounts, makes these games super interesting and call for, busting intrigue and style and substance matter. makes it be very enthralling and busting in almost every figure, every way. So yeah, I mean, I just feel like this game undoubtedly is the GOAT. It reformed Far Cry. If Far Cry 3 did not pop off like it did in this game, aka this is when Ubisoft really wanted to open the motherfucking minds of video gamers, aka gamers, because I feel like video gamers is like a weird sense of like title and term. Pretty much open the mind of gamers around the world and people, because Far Cry 3 is one of the best video games of all time in my opinion. And that is my opinion. No, I believe that Far Cry 3 is one of the best, and arguably believe should even be in a statement like this. It is, because it tells a story that only a game can tell. And it does it so stupidly, bustingly, and it does it so introspective, poetically, and so sublimely, because of the fact that every aspect of it is representing what type of toll, this type of insanity and deliberate call for violence to be your securing of power can bring down a nigga. Jason becomes worse than everyone he kills because he doesn't see the madness he does. He can't fathom how much fuck he does, because to him it is the only way for him to feel some growth, some grasp of life. This obsession with getting vengeance is bringing his downfall. It's only until he dies or he puts a sword to the fucking, test against another nigga until he can see a little essence of that. Or even in this case, putting a knife to his ex-girlfriend. Terrible, bro. And that's beautiful. So, yeah, that's a masterpiece. GOAT game. I don't want to fucking hear it. Simple as that. That's it for my tier list, y'all. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Again, this tier list could change depending on how I feel about replaying the games. But I feel so strongly in my tier list that this probably will stay the same. Maybe a few might change. But like I've said, there's some debatable tiers here, and what you could say is better. But yeah, I just believe that, this is a solid record of tier list all around. GOAT is Far Cry 3, though. Love y'all. I'm going to see you guys in the next one. Peace out, mommy. Love y'all.